Nikki Haley has not had a good day. Oh, God. Oh my God. So apparently Nikki Haley was recently in New Hampshire having a little town hall meeting in New Hampshire. And she was asked a question about the Civil War. Now, a lot of people are biting off Nikki Haley's head today for the response that she gave. But I think you need to understand how Nikki Haley has a tendency to flip-flop when it comes to racial issues. I happen to know firsthand because Nikki Haley used to be my governor. I remember when Nikki Haley was running for governor of South Carolina. And it's really interesting because Nikki doesn't like to talk about this too much. So we're going to go back and we're going to work our way up to what just happened today, because I want you to see how Nikki bobs and weaves when it comes to racial issues. You see, when Nikki Haley was a candidate for governor of South Carolina, oh my God, this gets me so frustrated. In 2010, she was actually pretty much a victim of racial comments herself. I want to take you back to that moment, 2010. SC lawmaker refers to Obama and Nikki Haley as raghead. See, I remember when all this happened. This was June 4th of 2010. Here we go. It has been quite a campaign for South Carolina Republican gubernatorial candidate Nikki Haley. Haley, who has the backing of Sarah Palin, has faced 2 allegations of extramarital affairs in recent weeks, both of which she has vehemently denied. Now she is in the middle of a controversy involving one of her rivals, State Senator Jake Knotts, who called her, along with President Obama, a raghead. This was the statement that he gave. We already got one raghead in the White House, Knotts said on an internet political talk show last night, according to The State. The State is the newspaper of South Carolina. We don't need another in the governor's mansion. I'll let you take some time to process that. Okay. Haley's parents are Indian immigrants, and she was raised as a Sikh before converting to become Methodist. Citing those who saw Knott's comments, the State reports that he talked at length about Haley's parents' religion and her family on the show. Now, why did I want to show you that? Because when you hear some of the comments that Nikki Haley is making about Palestinian people and that she's made about other Arab nations as well, and you'll see that again tonight as well. Oh my God. I want you to remember that Nikki Haley was given some comments about her family's religion and their ethnicity when she was a candidate for governor. And I'm sure that wasn't the first time. She grew up in South Carolina. I lived in South Carolina for a couple of years. Racism is not covert there. It is very overt. People let you know exactly how they feel about your race to your face and your religion. So I wanted to remind you of that. Fast forward, the Confederate flag issue in South Carolina. For those who are not aware, when I was in College of South Carolina, there was a Confederate flag in front of the State House. You cannot miss it. If you drive down Gervais Street, it's kind of right in your face. There's the State House kind of sitting up on this little hill, and there's this big Confederate flag. The argument that had been given by state politicians before is that it was a memorial. There have been numerous protests to call for removal of the Confederate flag in front of the State House, mainly because, let me be clear here, not necessarily because it was offensive to people, but also because it was offensive to possible investors. You see, there were multiple companies that did not feel comfortable actually opening up locations in Columbia, South Carolina because of that flag. Steve Spurrier, who was the football coach at the University of South Carolina at the time, said that he actually had difficulty recruiting some of the best football players to come play for the University of South Carolina because their parents were offended by the flag. So a lot of this went back to Capitol. But I want to show you something that Nikki Haley did in reference to the Confederate flag. See, Sabby does not forget. Nikki Haley defended right to secession, Confederate History Month, and the Confederate flag in 2010 talk. Let's go to this. See, I know who Nikki is. Former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley defended states' rights to secede from the United States, South Carolina's Confederate History Month, and the Confederate flag in a 2010 interview with a local activist group that fights attacks against Southern culture. Now, 2010. 2010 was the same year that she was called a raghead. Haley, who was running for South Carolina governor at the time, made the comments during an interview with a new defunct, the Palmetto Patriots, a group which included a one-time board member of a white nationalist organization. The former UN ambassador also described the Civil War as two sides fighting for different values, one for tradition and one for change. So I'm pointing this out because I want to remind you guys, when you hear the recent comments from Nikki Haley about the Civil War, I want to remind you what she said about the Civil War in 2010. Haley announced last week that she was running for president, becoming first official major challenger to former President Donald Trump. The interview was posted on the group's YouTube at the time and resurfaced over the years, most recently by Patriot Takes, an anonymous Twitter account that monitors right-wing extremism. Let's go down here. This part here. I want to make sure I'm on the right part. Here we go. The group reportedly inspired Charleston shooter Dylan Roof. Oh, let me go up. Sorry. One of the Palmetto Patriots interviewers was Robert Slimp, a pastor and member of the Sons of Confederate Veterans and one-time board member and active member of the Council of Conservative Citizens, CCC, a white nationalist group. The CCC is a self-described white rights group that opposes non-white immigration and advocates for white nationalist ideology. The group reportedly inspired Charleston shooter Dylan Roof, the white nationalist who killed 9 people at a historically black church in Charleston, South Carolina in 2015. Now hold on to 2015. The shooting spurred Haley, then governor, to call for the removal of the Confederate battle flag from South Carolina State House grounds, where it had been since being removed from the state's Capitol dome in 2000. In a comment to CNN, Haley's spokesperson cited her decision to help remove the flag from the grounds, but declined to address Haley's other comments. Nikki Haley's groundbreaking leadership on removing the Confederate flag from the South Carolina Capitol grounds is well known, says Ken, who was her spokesperson. He wrote in an email to CNN. Now, this is to show you how Nikki Haley she flip-flops when it comes to racial issues. Because for one, you have the comments towards her about her ethnicity and her family's religion in 2010. Then you have the comments coming from her to defend what she would consider to be Southern culture and defend the Confederate flag. Then you have Nikki Haley calling for the removal of the Confederate flag. So she's been known to go back and forth. You heard about her comments earlier here about the Civil War. So the comments that she made that took over the news today, that was not a surprise to me because Nikki Haley has made those comments before. Nikki kind of just moves back and forth when it comes to racial issues. She tends to do what is best for her at that point in time in her political career. Defends the flag. In the 2010 interview, Haley said the Confederate flag was not racist, but part of heritage and tradition within the state. She called the flag's location a compromise of all people, that everybody should accept a part of South Carolina. But keep in mind, members of her own party in South Carolina didn't even want to accept her. You know, for those groups that come in and say they have issues with the Confederate flag, I will work to talk to them about it. So you see, Nikki Haley was willing to work with them. She was willing to work with the groups that disagreed with it. Let me try to persuade them to get them to understand. She went on to say, I will work and talk to them about the heritage and how this is not something that is racist. This is something that is a tradition that people feel proud of, and let them know that we want their business in the state. What did I tell you about Capitol? I told you part of it was just not about hurt feelings. Part of the reason for removing that flag was about business and Capitol, because some businesses did not feel comfortable setting up a location in Columbia, South Carolina because of it. And that flag, where it is, was a compromise of all people that everybody should accept as part of South Carolina. Now, here she switches gears. After the Charleston church mass shooting, Haley called on the state legislature to remove the Confederate flag from the state capitol, becoming one of the defining moments of her governorship. Then she goes on to say, there is a place for that flag. It's not in a place that represents all people of South Carolina. So, Nikki, when it comes to these types of issues, she's been known to shift depending on how it is going to benefit her. Now, I want to take you back to this. Just a reminder, the role Nikki Haley's 2015 decision to remove the Confederate flag could play in her presidential run. Now, this was from Time magazine. This was February 14th of this year. This is the part I want you to see right here. This was after the shooting. After the service, Haley told her team she intended to call for the removal of the Confederate flag from the Capitol. According to Rob Godfrey, then her deputy chief of staff, she would ask lawmakers and community leaders to join her for a news conference, she said, but she wasn't sure how many would show up. In the end, she convinced a bipartisan group of lawmakers, including the son of Strom Thurmond, the infamous segregationist, to join her. The next month, the legislature passed a bill to take down the flag. So remember that, people. So 2015, that was Nikki Haley acknowledging that there was some obviously some racism behind the flag. Not everyone may feel that way, but I can tell you from personal experience living in South Carolina. By the way, this was not that long ago. Living in South Carolina, I remember seeing bumper stickers with the Confederate flag that said comments like, never apologize for being white. I saw people who had t-shirts, Confederate flag t-shirts that said, get your hands off my flag. Some people, for some of them, it was a racist thing. For some people, they said it was a battle flag and it was part of their heritage because they had family members that were part of the Civil War, whatever. But it was very obvious that the flag was offensive. And my thing was, what was wrong with the American flag? Why we got all these different, why you got two flags? Why we doing this? Now, listen to this part. That decision Haley made 8 years ago embodies both the strengths and vulnerabilities of her presidential candidacy, which she launched Tuesday morning, becoming the first major challenger to former President Donald Trump. The former governor enters the race as a candidate who aims to unite the GOP's warring factions and usher in a new generation of the party's leadership, but whose history in a deep red state could also set her at odds with the party's far right flank. So that was the warning about her presidential candidacy. That was back in February. Okay. Now that you have seen some history in reference to how Nikki feels when it comes to racial issues, let's go into the comments that Nikki Haley made recently. At this event in New Hampshire, there was an audience member that asked her about the Civil War. Let's get into this, buddy.
Meanwhile, in New Hampshire, during a campaign stop, Republican presidential candidate, former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, was asked this question by an audience member. Quote, "What was the cause of the Civil War?" This is how Governor Haley responded.
What was the cause of the United States Civil War?
Well, don't come with an easy question or anything. I mean, I think the cause of the Civil War was basically how government was going to run, the freedoms and what people could and couldn't do. What do you think the cause of the Civil War was?
So people heard this today and they were like, oh my God, did you hear what Nikki Haley said about the Civil War? And she didn't even mention the fact that slavery was the cause of the Civil War. Didn't mention that at all. And for me, I was just kind of like, she's kind of said something like this before, which I just showed you years ago. So I was not surprised that she made that comment. Let's continue.
I'm sorry?
I'm not running for president. I wanted to see your
That's a good thing.
On the cause of the Civil War.
I mean, I think it always comes down to the role of government and what the rights of the people are. And I will always stand by the fact that I think government was intended to secure the rights and freedoms of the people. It was never meant to be all things to all people. Government doesn't need to tell you how to live your life. They don't need to tell you what you can and can't do. They don't need to be a part of your life. They need to make sure that you have freedom. We need to have capitalism. We need to have economic freedom. We need to make sure that we do all things so that individuals have the liberties so that they can have freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom to do or be anything they want to be without government getting in the way.
Thank you. And then in the year 2023, it's astonishing to me that you answer that question without mentioning the word slavery.
What do you want me to say about slavery?
No.
Oh. So, again, you have to remember where Nikki Haley grew up. She grew up in South Carolina. Okay. South Carolina profited heavily from the slave trade, particularly Charleston, South Carolina. What was the number one product that was produced and grown by slaves in South Carolina? That was rice. And people from South Carolina can tell you this. Nikki Haley knows this. So the fact that she wouldn't mention it, and then that voter pushed her a little bit and said, I'm surprised that you wouldn't even mention the word slavery. Her response is, what do you want me to say about slavery? Make no mistake, people. Nikki Haley didn't bring up slavery because Nikki Haley is pandering to her base. Nikki Haley knows that bringing that up opens up all other different types of doors. Because the thing is this, if you bring up slavery, then you got to acknowledge the fact that this country and definitely her state received free labor. Free labor. You got to bring that up. You can't pretend like it doesn't exist. Okay. All right. So there's that. Then it comes into another question. Because if there would have been a follow-up question, it could have also been, well, do you think that African-American descendants of slavery deserve cash reparations because free labor happened in this country? So it gets into all this other stuff. Nikki Haley didn't bring it up because she didn't want to turn off the base of people that she's trying to win over. That's why she didn't bring it up. I just showed you her history. She had no problem. This woman had no problem calling for the removal of the Confederate flag in Columbia, South Carolina. But when she is asked about the Civil War, she won't even mention the word slavery at all. She talks about, oh, it's about people's rights. Rights for who? Because slaves didn't have rights. We're talking about a time when slaves were counted as two-thirds of a person? Or 2/5 of a person? Weren't even a whole person. They didn't have any rights. Let's continue.
You answered my question. Thank you.
Next question.
Mm-hmm.
So, Eugene, we can pick through that a million different ways. Perhaps the follow-up question where she says, "What do you want me to say about slavery?" Is what stuck with most people as they watch that commentary on Governor Haley, perhaps, but also about the state of the Republican Party. And as you watch the gears turning there, what she should and should not say in order to keep her support.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And if you watch the crowd as things were going downhill, you could start to see people kind of get a little squeamish as she was answering those questions. You know, my family's always been from South Carolina, so I am very, very well versed on the conversation that happens. I was just there earlier this week for Christmas. I'm very well versed in the conversation that happens versus, you know, whether it was states' rights or slavery. What was the real conversation? So she's showing.
Yes, 3/5. Thank you, Lorez. Thank you so much.
That, right, that she's a product of that conversation. This is also something in line with what she said before when asked when running for governor in 2010 about slavery or about the cause of the Civil War. Obviously, it was about slavery. If it was about states' rights, it was the state's ability to hold slaves. If it was about freedoms and what the government could tell you what to do, it was whether or not the government could tell you whether or not you can own and beat people, rape and kill them because they were your property, right? That is clear to everyone who has eyes and has read history books. But what she is showing is the fact that in the Republican Party right now, there is not a lot of room for folks who would say something like that, who would be honest about slavery as the cause and the main cause of the Civil War. You know,
let me pause here for a second, and I want to say why this is important in reference to a state like New Hampshire. What you have to understand, and I had to learn this when I moved to New England, what you have to understand is here in New England, you know, slavery is kind of like a taboo thing. Like there was a town in Rhode Island that just acknowledged, I think it was like a year ago, that they had slaves, which is really interesting considering that Rhode Island was actually the third largest slave transport. So they're kind of touchy-feely about it, right? There's also schools here. It has been known, and I've talked to people that grew up in Maine. It has been known that in some parts of Maine, they don't even teach this type of history. I had a friend of mine when I lived in North Carolina, and she was from Maine. She had never seen it. She didn't even know what a Confederate flag was. It just wasn't taught to her. So when you come up here in some parts of New England, some people are just kind of like, well, we don't really know because we weren't a part of this. Like we weren't a part of, you know, Civil War, et cetera, all that jazz. So I don't think she was expecting to get that type of question from someone in New Hampshire.
You think about the last few years and what the Republican Party has focused on, the conversation about race in this country, their attacking of critical race theory. So there's almost no other answer that she could give in this Republican primary that wouldn't, you know, take some votes away from her as she is moving forward. I will say I got some texts from some of the staffers on the other campaigns of this exact message when it happened. But then when I asked them how their candidate would answer, they got a little pissed off at me and said, you would never ask them that question. And so it tells you that while they want this to knock her, they don't want to answer the question either.
Jen, this shouldn't have been hard. Slavery is the answer here. But to Eugene's point, it is reflective of where the Republican base is right now, that you can't tell a simple truth for fear of losing voters in what has become such a radicalized Republican Party. But let's take a step back and put this in the context of this primary.
But see, I think that he's missing the point as well. It's not about being difficult. It's not about the fact that it was hard for her to do or that it was difficult. Nikki Haley's playing a role. They all have these different roles that they play, right? And to be honest with you, so does liberal media. Because what the gentleman mentioned on that show is he said, well, this is where the Republican base is at. Not all of them. Not everyone who's Republican has issues with civil rights. Not everyone that's Republican would agree with what Nikki Haley said. This is what happens when you talk to people on the other side. So we got to remove that notion from our head. And we also have to remove the notion that everybody that is a Republican is racist. When people tell me that, it's really funny because I'm like, okay, what about Black people that are Republicans? You know, it's just stuff like that. But I point this out because he wanted to bring up the Republican Party in reference to this. But I want you to see how CNN responded to this, because they actually blamed the voter. They blamed the gentleman who asked the question. Now, this is supposed to be a liberal network, CNN, right? So Glenn Greenwald actually called this out. If any other candidate refused to say slavery and glorified the Civil War this way, CNN would have declared a national racism emergency. But because DC elites are so desperate for Nikki Haley, watch CNN blame the voter for asking, then say her imperfect answer doesn't matter. This is very damning for CNN. And this was Caitlin Collins' segment. So let's go ahead and play this clip.
Front. Nikki Haley is in New Hampshire tonight making her case to.
Oh, let me make this louder.
She was asked tonight, just a few moments ago, by a voter about what was the cause of the Civil War. This is how she responded.
What was the cause of the United States Civil War?
Well, don't come with an easy question or anything. I mean, I think the cause of the Civil War was basically how government was going to run, the freedoms and what people could and couldn't do. What do you think the cause of the Civil War was? I'm sorry?
I'm not running for president. I want to see your view on the cause of the Civil War.
I mean, I think it always comes down to the role of government.
2023, it's astonishing to me that you answer that question without mentioning the word slavery.
What do you want me to say about slavery?
No, you answered my question. Thank you.
Next question.
Now, it's not your average town hall question, but she did seem surprised by it. And the voter, as you could hear there, called her out for not mentioning slavery. What do you make of that answer?
Let me pause here for a second and explain to people as well. She was surprised by it because, again, she was in New Hampshire, and FYI, there aren't that many Black people in New Hampshire. If you've never been to New England, you know, you coming up this way, if you're looking for Black people, you'll see us in Connecticut, you'll see us in Massachusetts, but after that, we are hard to find. I'm just keeping it real. We are hard to find. Once you get to New Hampshire, it's like, whoa. And there are Black people there, but there are very few. And it's like that as you go further and further. So I don't think she was expecting that to come from New Hampshire. Listen to how they respond to this. Listen to how they blame the voter.
Yeah, if I were her, that would have been pretty easy to just say that and move on. But it's also, I think, pretty clear that that voter was kind of trying to catch her and saying something that would potentially make her less appealing to those independent voters in New Hampshire that she's going to rely on so heavily. So this was an easy question to answer. I wish she had answered it using the easy word, say slavery. There's a disagreement in our country about it. But ultimately, I don't think it's actually going to hurt her standing one way or another with Republican primary voters at this point.
This is the voter trying to hurt her with independent voters. This is the voter asking a question. Asking a question. And this is on CNN. Let me explain to you why they're defending Nikki Haley. Nikki Haley is establishment to the T. She supports the military-industrial complex. She's a warmonger. Nikki Haley wants to go to war. This isn't a secret. She's been vocal about this in the debates. So she fits that status quo. That's who they want. And also, the donors love her. She's pro-Israel. She wants to go to war. And she's not Donald Trump. And remember what I told you earlier on. The donors had already decided, according to Fox News, the donors had already decided that they were not going to go with Donald Trump this time. They said this time they wanted to go with Ron DeSantis. Well, Ron DeSantis didn't seem to poll as well as they thought that he would. Then they saw that Nikki Haley was actually doing pretty well in the debates. So then the donors decide, let's go with Nikki Haley. So this is how this works, people. If you just follow the money, you'll see why things are said on these outlets and why there's no pushback. That's why they are trying to defend Nikki and run cover for Nikki. Now, Nikki Haley did issue a response since this has been brought to the light. This was also shared by Caitlin Collins. Let's hear what Nikki Haley had to say.
Civil War was about slavery. We know that. That's the easy part of it. What I was saying was, what does it mean to us today? What it means to us today is about freedom. That's what that was all about. It was about individual freedom. It was about economic freedom. It was about individual rights. Our goal is to make sure, no, we never go back to the stain of slavery, but what's the lesson in all of that? Civil War was about slavery. We know that. That's the easy part of it. What I was saying was, what does it mean to us today? What it means to us today is about freedom. That's what that was all about. It was about individual freedom. It was about economic freedom. It was about individual rights. Our goal is to make sure, no, we never go back to the stain of slavery, but what's the lesson in all of that?
So this is Nikki Haley. Of course, she had to issue a response because there was tremendous backlash for this comment, the way she responded to that question. But the thing is just that, again, that was not a mistake by Nikki Haley. I want to be very clear. Nikki Haley is playing a role. She's playing the role that she believes she needs to play in order to either possibly win the Republican nomination, which I don't think is going to happen. It's obviously Trump is still far in the lead, or possibly get a VP spot, but she's declined. She wants to be Trump's VP, or maybe she's trying to become something else. Maybe she's trying to get another cabinet position. You never know. But Nikki Haley is there to play a role. Another thing I want to bring to your attention that you may not be aware of, and I'm pretty sure this could have caused some backlash within the family, because Nikki Haley's daughter, the one that Vivek actually mentioned in reference to having a TikTok channel, Nikki Haley's daughter her boyfriend is African-American. So then there's that. So she couldn't just ignore it. She obviously had to issue a response. But Nikki is playing a role. And I've said this for quite some time. I always think that Nikki Haley was an opportunist. Now I want to show you again how she flip-flops when it comes to these issues, because here she is here breaking. Nikki Haley calls for Jews to leave Israel. They should go to pro-Zionist countries. The US, the UK, Saudi Arabia. Listen to it.
Where should the Palestinians go?
Well, they should be going through the Rafah Gate and Egypt take them. But I've always said that, what you should have is they should go to pro-Hamas countries. Qatar, Iran, if you send them there, Turkey, those are pro-Hamas countries. That's where they should go.
But they're on the run for their lives, taking whatever they can, their kids in tow. They're not able to get into Egypt. How are you supposed to even make it to Qatar at this point?
Isn't that telling that Egypt won't take them? Why won't Egypt take them? Because they don't trust which ones are terrorists and which ones aren't.
I don't care about Gaza. I literally don't care. For all I care, they can go out and swim in the sea. I want to see dead bodies of terrorists around Gaza. That's what I want to see.
ואני אכן גאה על כך שמנעתי את הקמתה של מדינה פלסטינית, כי היום כולם מבינים מה הייתה יכולה להיות המדינה הפלסטינית הזאת, אחרי שראינו את המדינה הפלסטינית הקטנה בעזה, כולם מבינים מה היה קורה, לא היינו באמת מתקפלים מול הלחצים הבינלאומיים, ומאפשרים מדינה כזאת, גם ביהודה ושומרון, גם בסביב ירושלים, גם בפאתי תל אביב.
It's time that Gaza ends. The 2 million people who live there, they are clever assassins. They need to be removed from that land. That land needs to be turned into a national park. And since they're the voluntary mercenaries for Iran, they need to be dropped on the doorstep of Iran. Let Iran deal with those people.
Michelle Bachmann, everybody, she does a great job, doesn't she?
So see how they're comparing what Nikki Haley said to what they said? So here's Nikki Haley telling you, I don't know how else to say this again.
Where should the Palestinians go?
Well, they should be going through the Rafah Gate and Egypt take them. But I've always said that, what you should have is they should go to pro-Hamas countries. Qatar, Iran, if you send them there, Turkey, those are pro-Hamas countries.
So Nikki wants the Palestinian people to be displaced. She wants them to go to a pro-Hamas country. What kind of wild shit is this?
That's where they should go.
But they're on the run for their lives, taking whatever they can, their kids in tow. They're not able to get into Egypt. How are you supposed to even make it to Qatar at this point?
Isn't that telling that Egypt won't take them? Why won't Egypt take them? Because they don't trust which ones are terrorists and which ones aren't.
No, Egypt won't take them, not because Egypt has a problem with the Palestinian people. Egypt won't take them because they don't want the state of Israel to take over all of the land, because they know that that is their home, the Palestinian people's home, and they know what Israel is trying to do. That's why Egypt won't take them. Can you believe this woman? Can you believe her? Watch Ron DeSantis and Vivek Ramaswamy capitalize off of what she said in that statement. Let's go to some of the comments here. But I had to show you, and sorry if that was long-winded, but I had to show you who Nikki Haley was. I had to go back and show you. Let's go to some of the comments here. I'm trying to see where I left off. Oh, sorry. Thank you for the super chat, Flower Bro. Occupy your representatives and demand they represent you. Call them, email them every single day. Well said, Flower Bro. Thank you for the super chat, Quintessential. Does Wu have ambitions beyond Boston? It wouldn't surprise me if she did. Just keeping it real. Sia says, Nikki Haley knows exactly what she's doing by playing stupid. This tells everybody to show her your back. Not a friend to people of color and a sellout to herself and Indians. Thank you, Eric Gray. Capitalism does not equal economic freedom, Nikki Haley, and her comments are a testament to her proximity to whiteness. And thank you for the super chat, Andre. Did you see Rising today in regards to Nikki's comments? Not yet. I haven't had a chance to watch Rising today yet. It was pretty busy. Black Ronin said 75% to 80% of slave ships were based in Newport, Rhode Island. That's right. And what did slaves help produce there? Rum. Thank you for the super chat, Amanda. 3/5 clause in Constitution calls for a modern revision. I agree. Thank you, Eric. Imagine being a Florida teacher having to explain to adults why learning Black history is important. But Nikki know this. Nikki, let me tell you again, Nikki grew up in South Carolina. Her father at one point taught at a historically Black college in South Carolina. Thank you for the super chat, Dwayne. Yeah, Nikki got the easy part wrong. Thank you, Chima. Nikki Nimarata Haley wants to be white so bad. Damn. And thank you, Dijon. America's economy, stock market came from slavery. Yes, the stock market. Well said there, guys. Well said. Oh, Nikki. There's a song by Prince called Darling Nikki. Go listen to it.